Welcome to In Our Community, and I'm your host, Jim Too. And tonight we'll be talking about Mount Umunhum and the Almaden Air Force Station. And joining me to talk about Mount Umunhum he is the historian and archivist for the Almaden Air Force Station, Basim Jabber. Basim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
All right. So where is Mount Umunhum?
Umunhum.
And so where is it, and tell us a little bit about it.
Mount Umunhum is in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's the fourth tallest peak in the Santa Cruz Mountains. You could see it from just about everywhere in the southern San Francisco Bay Area and even a little bit beyond. And it's got a very unmistakable structure on top, which makes it probably the most identifiable peak in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Okay, and it was the location. It was the location of a structure. What was that? What's that structure?
Right, that structure is what remains today of what used to be an early warning radar station during the Cold War.
Okay.
It was the United States Air Force installation.
Okay.
It was part of the NORAD air defense system, where this country needed a defense system to protect itself against any incoming airborne threats, mainly like Soviet bombers during the Cold War.
Okay, and how long was that? That was the Almaden Air Force Station, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and what years were the Air Force Station active?
Well, it was built in 56 and 57, and it was operational in 1958, and it remained operational for about 22 years until 1980, when it was closed. By then, satellites sort of took over, and ground radar sites were sort of obsolete or surplus, they said, and it was closed in 1980, and about probably the summer, early fall of 1980, it was sort of shuttered.
All right, so then when it was part of the NORAD chain of stations, what was actually there?
There was a big radar, one of the largest, actually the largest radar that the Air Force had in terms of a ground rotating radar. It was the largest and highest power. It was one of 12 like in the country, but it was actually used to benchmark the other ones after it, so it was very unique. And there was a couple other different types of radars there. There was a search radar and a height finder radar. But that radar equipment was used basically to search the skies 24/7 with crews watching scopes around the clock.
And so I assume, were they watching for any specific things, or just more of a general threat?
Anything that was unidentified or not logged in FAA flight plan.
Okay.
And if they did pick up something like that, they would scramble fighter jets from nearby Air Force bases to do a visual intercept. And of course, had the day come that the Soviets, came, then they would have scrambled more jets.
So they're basically primarily looking for either Soviet aircraft or missiles.
Yeah, well, not missiles, because if you saw a missile, the radar only had a range of 250 miles, and if you saw a missile at that range, it probably was too late.
Too late. Too late.
That's why satellites took over.
Yeah. How many people were at the station when it was active?
At its peak in the mid to late 60s, there was 120 airmen and their families.
Okay.
About 220 people lived there on site.
Oh, okay.
And when you lived there anywhere between a few months to 7 years, if you happen to do a back-to-back tour there.
Well, when it was active, how isolated was it?
Well, not too isolated. Maybe a 35, 45-minute drive, and you can be in the valley floor in San Jose. So, back then, the drives weren't that bad. But there was not a lot of stoplights you had to worry about once you got down to the edge of the valley.
Not as congested as it was today.
No, certainly not. No, it had a remote feel to it in terms of mountaintop radar site. Great views.
Great views, right?
Yeah, close proximity to major metropolitan area, which is why they put it there.
Okay. Well, I think we do have a couple of photographs of the base when it was active.
Yes.
So I think we'll put it up on the screen here. So is that what year do you think that was?
This is 1966, circa late 66, early 67. This is the housing cantonment area. So those long buildings that you see there are the actual barracks buildings. There were 6 of them. Okay. And they housed airmen dormitory style rooms, 2 beds per room. Okay. In the earlier days, they were open bay. You think kind of like, you see a lot of Vietnam War movies where they're all open bay barracks, and that's what it was like. And they had a lot of the amenities that you would see in any other military installation. They had everything there except for schools.
Okay, but you said the families would also live there with some of the soldiers. They also live in this type of setting, or did they have something else?
So towards in the back of that photo, there were some pictures of, you could see some of the housing units, which were basically apartment-style housing units.
Okay.
You know, your typical wood frame, stucco buildings, you know, with carports and such. And so families lived there, children and parents lived there as well.
All right, then I think we do have another photograph of the base. And so what's this of?
This was just after a big snowstorm in 1962.
So when people say it doesn't snow in the Bay Area,
Yeah.
we just point to this and say
Right.
it does?
The elevation on Mount Umunhum is 3,486 feet, so it does get snow from time to time during the winter times, anywhere from a dusting to, I think the record was somewhere close to 3 feet,
Okay.
which is quite a lot of snow for the area.
And so are we seeing more barracks here? From a
Yeah, you're
different
seeing
angle?
more barracks there in the front. You saw maybe the mess hall that was there, but there was they called it 88 structures, but they called the fire hose hut a structure. But in terms of structures with doors you can walk in and people worked and lived in, there was about 40 to maybe between 40 and 50 structures.
In terms of acreage, how big was it?
I don't know the exact number. It was somewhere, I want to say it was somewhere close to about 19 acres,
Okay.
a little bit larger. And they had another site 1 mile over to the west, which was the big radio facility, which was their link to the outside world.
Okay.
So it was sort of 2 pieces of property which comprised the station.
Okay. So after 1980, it shut down. It was eclipsed by radar in terms of its function.
Yes.
Right. But at some point, what happened after the base shut down?
After the station shut down, it was still owned by the Air Force.
Right.
And the GSA, the General Services Administration, took it over in 1982 and had caretakers living on site just to maintain it. And the GSA's job is basically to clean it up and prepare it for sale to the public.
Right.
And they tried for a while to find someone to buy it. I think San Jose State University was looking at it for a business school conference center.
Okay.
And what happened was in 1986, an agency called the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District ended up purchasing it for $260,000.
Okay.
And they have owned it since. They still own it,
Okay.
the site. But however, all the buildings except for one are gone.
Okay. So they've had it for, I'm doing my math right, it's close to 30 years now.
That's correct,
Okay.
yeah.
So what have they done with it?
Well, during the first, I'd say 90% of that, not much. It was sort of stalled in terms of they need to do a cleanup.
Right.
As you know, buildings were built with lead paint, asbestos. That was just commonplace. Even
Okay.
buildings everywhere down the valley are still built like that. So they were trying to get the site cleaned up.
Okay.
The federal government was going to be the one to do the cleanup. It took a while to get that going.
So a little bit of abatement and
Yes, they finally did that in 2010. The site was cleaned, and then they did a demolition of almost all the buildings.
So it took them 24 years to get rid of all the asbestos and lead paint and all the other bad stuff.
Yeah, they ran into quite a few obstacles along the way.
Did the owner Mid-Peninsula pay for it, or did somebody else pay for that?
Actually, the federal government paid for
Okay.
that. Yeah, it was an earmark that Congressman Mike Honda obtained through the Department of Defense, and that money went towards the cleanup as well as some of the demolition of the site itself.
So what did they demolish and what did they abate?
They demolished abatement. The cleanup was anywhere that needed to be cleaned up.
Right.
Any lead paint, any asbestos, PCBs, that was all cleaned up.
Okay.
In terms of what was demolished, everything but 2 structures. There was the flagpole, which
Okay.
remained, and then there was the main radar tower, which is the most prominent feature of the station,
Okay.
which is the only visible structure mainly from the valley floor.
Okay, and I think we have at least a couple pictures of the radar,
Yes.
the radar structure here.
Here it is in 1962, just after it was built. And the sail, or the antenna on top, was 125 feet wide, 50 feet tall, and it weighed 85.5 tons.
Okay.
So that was the largest ground rotating radar that the Air Force had. The building itself was 84.5 feet tall,
Oh wow. Okay.
and it was about 63 feet by 63 feet, side dimensions.
So a lot of square foot. So that adds up to a lot of square footage.
Yeah, there's 3,600 square feet on each of 5 floors in the building, and what it housed was just the equipment to support that radar.
Okay.
So none of the other equipment had had to do with any of the other site, other parts of the site.
Okay. So when the base was closed and all the abatement work it was done, I assume then that the machinery that operated the radar dish was also removed, correct?
Yeah, it's standard operating procedure that the military removes that equipment and as well as the antenna on top, because a lot of the componentry and materials are proprietary. They're classified, and they just don't leave it sitting there. They have to remove it.
Okay. So what then? Okay, so the flagpole remains. What of the building still remains?
So the core structure without the antenna and nothing inside it. So just the concrete structure itself.
So inside, is it just a bare empty shell?
It's pretty much that. Yeah, you can call it a blank canvas.
Are there floors?
Yeah.
Okay, there are floors.
Yeah,
how many floors are in?
5 floors.
5 floors. Okay.
5 floors. There's actually a 5th and a half floor. They actually have it labeled as 5 and a half on the doorway. It was the antenna deck mezzanine just underneath the antenna that rotated above.
Okay, so is that where a little bit of the machinery was that would turn the dish, or is that where you can see the?
Yeah, the machinery that they actually turned the dish was on the roof. All that was inside was the componentry that generated the radar signal, the receiver, the power amplifiers, and all the other electrical and components that basically operated that. The radar was built by General Electric, and as you know, they were very big in electronics and such, and so there was a lot of componentry that went along with that radar.
Okay, so if someone wanted to go to the tower or to the radar building today, would they be able to? Are there stairs that you can climb up, or is it just literally just looking up and there's a floor and there's nothing else? There's no way to get up there.
Well, the site today is actually still not open to the public.
Okay. It's
still off limits to the public. The Open Space District, who owns it, is actually working pretty hard at opening the site to the public. They're doing a pretty good job of that. Their initial plans didn't include the tower being there. And through a lot of public outcry, they've given the opportunity for the public to raise some funds to help preserve the tower.
Okay. What would preserving the tower, what would that entail?
2 phases. First, preserving the tower itself in a sealed form, no entry, just to make sure it doesn't get knocked down.
Gotcha.
You know, sealing the cracks and filling in any of the cracks and sealing them, redoing the roof railing, things like that.
Okay.
The second phase would be find out to do something with the tower inside. There's a lot of opportunities and possibilities of what we could do inside that building.
What would some of your plans or dream plans be?
A lot of the ideas that we've been tossing around, obviously a Cold War museum.
Right.
There's a day-use science camp, educational facility for school children.
Okay.
You know, anything from like a little snack shop, anything, a visitor center would be ideal for that. The ground floor itself is prime for that. It has 2 entrances, so it's all, you know, ADA compliant, which is a very big thing these days.
Okay, all right.
But it's 3,600 feet on the ground floor.
So there's a lot of office space that you could use.
Yeah, a lot of real estate.
A lot of square footage.
There's a lot of room.
So phase 1 is basically just make sure that preserve the structure so it doesn't collapse.
Yes, that's correct.
Then phase 2, optimistically, was to convert the interior of the space so that it can be used for something.
Right, and that would require sort of what they call a maintenance partnership. You know, someone to help fund what to do with the tower and help maintain it.
Okay. Now, the tower itself is visible from a good chunk of the South Bay, right? Could you give us people a idea of how visible it is, or?
A lot of people who live in Almaden Valley see it every day. People who live in you know, southern San Jose see it every day. You can see it from just about any angle. It's pretty. We call it omnipresent. Everywhere you look, you're going to see it. You see it coming down 101 through, you know, Mountain View. Okay. You look up and you can. It's almost lined up right with the tower. In fact, when you're coming down 101 through Mountain View, you're looking right at it. It's pretty unmistakable, and a lot of people connotate sort of home with it. You hear a lot of people say that they know that they're home when they can see the tower. It's sort of like a navigational aid, if you will.
All right. Now, is there any opposition to at least preserving the structure as it is?
Well, yeah, so naturally. So the Open Space District, the agency who owns the tower, I mean, their name is Open Space District. So naturally, their mission statement, you know, is not one that's conducive to, you know, supporting or maintaining buildings like this. So naturally, they wanted to tear it down. Through a lot of, you know, rallying of the public and attending a lot of their board meetings and their public meetings and just sort of, you know, voicing input, you know, and opinion. They sort of gave the public 5 years to raise funds to save it.
Okay.
They were ready to pretty much tear it down back in October of 2012.
Gotcha. So, but now I assume then, but they were at least willing to allow you to raise money, so it's not like they were militantly in favor of tearing it down, right?
You could say that, sure. I mean, they had the public not spoke up, it would be gone.
Right. Well, I mean, there are certain things that the public will speak up about that if someone really wanted to do something, they'd ignore it. But so when you rallied the public support, or when you still currently rally public support, someone would ask, well, why does this thing need to be preserved? And what do you tell them?
It's a piece of history. It's a strong, significant part of the South Bay's history. Santa Clara County, in fact. It's the only radar station in the county. It contributed to sort of the growth and the welfare of Silicon Valley, which was known as the Valley of Heart's Delight back then. A lot of big industry that was funded by the military during the Cold War was headquartered here in the Bay Area. The Bay Area was a very military-rich target. Lots of naval bases, Army bases, Air Force bases, and a lot of heavy industry, Moffett Field, the Blue Cube, call it. All that would have been prime target during the Cold War. And so without general air surveillance right here in the Bay Area, a lot of that wouldn't have been here. And so companies like Fairchild, HP, and Varian, a lot of those big companies which sort of formed Silicon Valley and are the underpinnings of the valley, probably would have set up shop somewhere else.
Okay, so basically, like, Umunhum was the eyes that protected the incubator of Silicon Valley.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, a lot of the componentry that was used in that radar and the computer equipment up on the summit was developed right here in the Bay Area.
Okay, and Umunhum was important to make sure that if I was the Soviet Union, that I didn't drop a nuke on Silicon Valley and wipe that all out.
Right.
Or like that guy in the James Bond movie played by Christopher Walken.
I remember that. Yes. A View to a Kill.
A View to a Kill. There you go.
That movie. Yes.
Even though I think that came after Umunhum closed, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. But anyways, but there are people who in the open space that want more open space. Is there a way that you can? Is there a way that to preserve the tower yet still maintain some consistency with the use of the general grounds as an open space?
Well, sure, absolutely. I mean, the open space district owns 62,000 acres of land. We're only talking about 3,600 square foot of ground area that we want to preserve. There's opposition to people who want to keep it and people who want it torn down. Obviously, the clear majority of that are people who want to keep it. It signifies it's a piece of Bay Area history. And it has very good eligibility, to be a county landmark.
Oh, okay. No, wait a minute. The square footage of the tower is 3,600 feet, but what's the footprint?
63 feet by 63 feet. Interior square feet, 3,600. You do 63 feet by 63 feet, it's a little bit larger. That's because the concrete walls themselves are anywhere from 10 to 14 inches thick, solid concrete.
But if you had the building preserved as a museum, there would be a little bit extra space for, say, parking and roads, right?
Yeah, so the Open Space District's plan for the use of the summit, which includes a trail system, a bunch of viewpoints, vista points, if you want to call them, and interpretive signage and such. Their plans also call for some parking area. Obviously, eventually the public will be able to drive their car up there and park and enjoy, the great views and hopefully enjoy a piece of history that's everybody has stared at for a half a century, and hopefully will still be there when the site's finally open.
Are there any access problems to the area itself, besides the preservation of the building, like to get there?
There's a paved road.
Okay.
Yeah, it needs to be retrofitted and repaired.
Does it need to be widened or?
In some areas, maybe, because a lot of the slides, recently, have sort of narrowed it down. But that road was paved. It was a two-way road.
It doesn't run across anybody's private property that would prevent easements or whatever like that?
It does, but it does. Yeah, in fact, it did more so back then than it does now. That's something that they're working on, is basically getting the access right of way.
Well, even if Mid-Penn or the Mid-Peninsula Open Space didn't want Umunhum preserved, they'd still work on the easement issues just for people to enjoy the open space, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Their initial form of access will be a hiking trail to the top, which there's no easement issues to get to their parking lot. They just built a brand new parking lot at the trailhead.
Okay.
And so you can enjoy that trail, which is about a 4-mile trail to the top. I've been on parts of that trail. It's a very nice trail. Okay.
Now, let's see here. So I assume someone's asked you about money, right? Because in terms of if just to preserve the building, is there an estimated cost?
Yeah, so the Open Space District has estimated it at around $1.2 million for the preservation costs.
Is that just a one-shot deal, or is that more of a is there a recurring thing to preserve?
That actually includes a little bit of the projected sort of a 20 to 40 year maintenance plan.
Okay.
And so that actually includes part of that.
Okay. How about if you had the museum or the conference center? What would that cost?
Well, we don't know that yet because we have to spec that out in terms of what would it take to do that. A lot of that doesn't take a lot to build a museum and have volunteers and docents work it. That's where the maintenance and funding partners would come into play.
Do you have a ballpark estimate in terms of either the conversion itself and or the annual upkeep?
We haven't ballparked the part after the preservation yet because we haven't finalized what we would do with the interior.
Okay.
Right.
So don't you have your scenarios of Plan A or Plan B?
That's
still
something
working
that
on?
we're working on. Yeah, the nonprofit that's trying to save it is actually working on that.
Okay. So, but as part of the Umunhum Conservancy, I mean, what are your short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals?
Right. So the Umunhum Conservancy is an official nonprofit that was formed actually the night that the Open Space District gave us 5 years. We formed it right there in the parking lot. And it took us about 7 years to get up and running and get our paperwork all in a row. And so we're an official 501c3 nonprofit.
Yep.
And we're taking donations today, and people can donate on our website, send in checks. It's all tax deductible. We were given 5 years to raise that money. So October of 2017 is our deadline.
That's your last year?
Yeah, that's the deadline they've given us. And so we're basically doing, our fair share of the
How much
work.
So you said 1.2 million to preserve the building, right?
Right.
How close are you?
We're about 20%.
20% there or 20% more to
20% there.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
20% there.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, as any nonprofit realizes, you have to spend money to raise money. And so the 1.2 is really 1.5. We've estimated the 300,000 that you have to spend along that way with fundraisers and consultants and other things. So
So what type of people have you gone to or approached initially for the support the support?
We've leveraged the social media a lot, which has worked very well. It's helped us build the initial capital to go and do those things like hire consultants, work with grant writers and fundraising partners. And so we're about to start a capital campaign where we go to a lot of large-scale donors of all kinds, anybody.
But are there any particular ones is there a particular profile of someone that you've realized is more supportive of what you're doing versus people who are like, huh?
Corporate sponsorship. We hear Google likes to spend money on history.
So no, you haven't reached out to say like people like veterans who may have been.
Oh yes, we've outreach to the veterans. A lot of the veterans who actually worked and lived up on Mount Umunhum are actually here in the Bay Area still, and a lot of the veterans are donors to this.
Or people, or like companies that may have worked in the aerospace industry, and the electronics industry versus, let's say, internet or .com.
Yes, yeah, we'll be addressing all of those corporate partners, and a lot of the companies who help build the components for that site, who are still in business today, are people who we'll go and talk to.
Okay, but so how did you become involved in the Conservancy?
I'm a hobbyist of photography on the side, and photography is what got me interested in this site. I've lived here all my life in the Bay Area, so I'm a native, and as I started to kind of be more aware of my surroundings in terms of a historical sense, I thought, wow, this Cold War radar station right here in our backyard. My photography is what got me to meet a lot of the people who were stationed and live up there, and I've made a lot of friends along the way, and so I've planned veterans reunions for those who were stationed there. And I go and I give history slideshow presentations on the history of the site, which have been a tremendous hit in the public. I never thought it would go this far.
Okay. Now, when you do your photo presentations, are they both past and present photos?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And inside and out as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where do you now? I assume your inside photos were from back in the day rather than present day?
A few of them. It's hard to see a lot of photos inside. Like you took a camera inside a Cold War radar station in the middle of the Cold War, you might get tried for treason, right? You're taking pictures of sensitive equipment. So Yeah, I have whatever photos I can get. A lot of the airmen just didn't have cameras and bring them into the actual, radar operations room.
Yeah. But more like, say, indoors, let's say at the very, like, this is the inside of my barracks, this is the PX, or like the kitchen, whatever, I assume like the living areas, or just, do you have photos of that back, day in the life of?
I do, yes. I have hundreds of photos that were all donated from the airmen themselves, mostly. Contributed to the archives, and they go towards telling the story of the history of the site, which is a fascinating history.
Do you remember any stories that are worth talking about, or?
I knew you were going to ask me. There's quite a lot of them
that are not necessarily classified. If they saw the aliens, then we'll save that for another show.
Well, that's a common question. Did they ever have a false alarm? Did they ever detect anything that was a threat? Sure. I mean, the commercial aircraft had to have their little responder, the identification friend or foe responder on, and occasionally that got turned off. And so, and occasionally a plane would vary away from its flight plan, and that would kind of raise the alarm, and they'd look into it.
And they'd send a little message to someone over at Moffett or Hamilton to just fly out and take.
It was actually Hamilton. That's right. Yeah.
Or maybe was it Alameda Naval? Or
no, those were Navy. Moffett and Alameda were Navy. It was actually Hamilton Air Force Base, which was the actual main support base for Alameda Air Force Station.
All right. So we have about a minute left. For those who want to become involved in helping the Umunhum Conservancy, where can they go?
They can go to our website, which is umunhum.net. That's umunhum.net. That's the site for the Umunhum Conservancy. Okay. And they could sign up for a mailing list. They could register for some of the historic slideshow presentations, and they could donate online.
All right. Hey, Basim, I think we're at the end of our segment. Thank you very much for doing the show. And I'd like to thank everybody. Thank you for watching this episode of In Our Community. Thank you very much.